Chapter 61 Beihai Underworld is ours. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Walking out of the dark hall, Darren relit a cigar and stretched greatly. In the dilapidated courtyard, dead ivy grew around a collapsed fountain. The night is miserable, the moonlight is cold and falling. The figure of the flying squirrel stood in the shadow of the wall, motionless and silent, as if blending into the surrounding buildings. For a full hour, he did not move at all, did not change his center of gravity, and his face was cold and resolute. Darren felt that he was not even breathing, and he was stationed here like a statue. Thanks for your hard work. A unique warmth flowed through Darren's heart, and he smiled and spoke. The North Sea is a very dangerous sea. He still clearly remembered how chaotic this sea area was when he first crossed over. The mafia is brazenly fighting in towns and streets, weeping civilians are trembling on the street corners, but the kingdom's dignitaries are drinking at elegant banquets. There is no basic trust between people. There is only trickery, deception, and betrayal. On the surface, they will call you brothers and give you gifts in a flattering manner, but if they turn around, they will stab others in the back. Darren, who was struggling to climb up the road to power, could no longer remember how many people's blood his hands had been stained with. He always had many more enemies than friends. Even now, in the North Sea, where he can almost cover the sky with one hand, he still lives cautiously every day. And in this environment, it is indeed a blessing to have a trustworthy and reliable deputy by your side. The flying squirrel slowly walked out of the shadows, a sullen smile appearing on his lips. You are cruel enough, you are just a 12-year-old brat. He naturally heard Darren's CPU to Doflamingo in the hall. Darren spread his hands and said, no matter how young a wolf is, it can easily rip out a person's throat. Don't forget that he was a man who killed his father at the age of 10 and awakened the domineering Haki. The flying squirrel was also silent when he heard this. He glanced at the chip that Darren was playing with, glanced at the gloomy hall with some worry, and asked, aren't you afraid that he will stab you in the back? He doesn't dare. Without evidence, no one will believe him. Darren smiled. Besides, I am his godfather now. The flying squirrel rolled his eyes. Father dies and son laughs. This happened to Doflamingo, but he also knew Darren's temperament. This ambitious top official of Beihai has crazy blood flowing in his bones. He likes the thrilling danger of putting himself on a tightrope on the edge of a cliff. It seemed that only this moment of suffocating tension, where his heart almost stopped beating, could make him truly feel alive. By the way, is this matter blocked? Darren seemed to remember something and suddenly asked. The flying squirrel nodded cautiously. At that time, a cordon was set up and civilians were completely evacuated. Even the Beihai Navy who followed us out to sea did not know the specific details. They only knew that this was a mission to defeat pirates. Darren laughed. That's good, just keep it secret for as long as you can. It's time for us to go back. If I remember correctly, we have an appointment with Vinsmoke Gaji tomorrow, the flying squirrel said solemnly. That's right, Germa's first batch of high-tech weapon samples have been produced. You need to go and see them in person for the first test. The specific interview location is awaiting Vinsmoke Gaji's reply. Darren nodded and took steps forward. The broad cloak of justice behind him danced wildly in the air. Very good. With this, our North Sea Fleet plan will officially begin. Under the night sky, his eyes were brighter than the stars. In the dark hall, the dusty glass windows on the dome cast cold and biting moonlight, falling on Doflamingo's body like silver. The wall lamp is still burning tenaciously, swirling light and shadow. The blond boy was sitting on the soft sofa, holding a burned-out cigar in his hand. He tilted his head back and stared straight at the high dome as if his eyes were out of focus. Dover. Little Lord. I don't know how long it took for the four of Toribol to slowly wake up from their coma. They first glanced around in horror, and then breathed a long sigh of relief when they found that there was no trace of the Navy. Dover. I said, why are we back? Toribol stood up with difficulty, holding his cane in one hand. He was panting slightly, and the heavy injuries on his body made his face extremely pale. I don't know either. When I woke up, I was already here. If I guess correctly. Doflamingo was still staring straight at the moon on the dome, and suddenly grinned. Rogers Darren should be the one who sent us back. As soon as these words came out, the four people in Toribol all took a deep breath, and a layer of cold sweat broke out on their backs. This place is located on Mignon Island, and this long-abandoned villa is the secret stronghold of the Don Quixote family, which only a few of them know, but now, the top officer of the Beihai Navy has sent all of them back unconscious. What does that mean? All their previous actions in the North Sea had already been targeted by that powerful monster-like Navy. Suddenly, they felt that this secret stronghold had become unsafe. It seemed that there were some invisible terrifying monsters hiding in those dark corridors and gloomy rooms, observing them secretly. Then young master, what should we do next? Diamante asked anxiously. Since they set out to sea, they have had a smooth journey and have never encountered such a heavy setback and blow. They have long been accustomed to others kneeling down in front of them and begging for mercy, and used to giving orders. But now, the navy named Rogers Darren was like an insurmountable towering wall, standing across their path to conquer the North Sea. With just one person, he easily killed over 1,000 of their subordinates, and among the several of them in front of Darren, no one is their combined enemy. That man was as powerful as Shura. It makes people fearful and despairing. What to do? Doflamingo muttered something to himself, and his eyes finally focused again. He turned his head and met the worried and frightened eyes of Torbol and others, and was silent for a long time. I have lost all my family, I only have you. A thought flashed through Doflamingo's mind. The moment the thought emerged, an unspeakable bitterness also came to my mind. He suddenly understood why Darren left Torbol and the others alive. So that's it. So that's it. You are really cruel. So, Darren, in your eyes, everything I do is as childish as a child playing house, right? Don't worry. Doflamingo sighed in his heart, but smiled on his face. The Beihai Underworld is ours now. In the gradually surprised eyes of the four people in Torbol, the blonde boy stood up from the sofa and laughed loudly. Beihai. From today on, Rogers Darren is the godfather of my Don Quixote Doflamingo. Beihai. The laughter that gradually became ferocious and crazy continued to echo in this gloomy courtyard. I ask for everything, and I ask for 5-point praise. Recently, I have bronchitis and persistent cough. Everyone should pay attention to their health. In addition, I wish all the college entrance examination students a successful start. Good luck. Chapter 62 Meeting. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The next day. North Sea, waters near an independent island. The sky is clear and the sea is blue. White seagulls soar freely in the cloudless sky, flying towards the distant skyline. A warship was sailing slowly, dragging a long white trail on the sea. How long until it arrives? Darren stood on the bow of the warship, with his arms crossed and a lit cigar biting in his mouth, his flawless white cloak flying in the wind behind him. It's probably a few minutes' flight from the agreed-upon location. The flying squirrel standing beside him held a permanent pointer in his hand to determine the course. The whereabouts of Germa 66 have always been erratic. As a mobile war country, the Army of Evil has no fixed territory. Darren nodded, turned his head and glanced at the far end of the deck, and suddenly smiled when he saw the two young figures sweating profusely. Noticing his eyes, the flying squirrel smiled bitterly and said, Major Guillaume and Major Kaki must have been stimulated. They both seem to be crazy recently and have devoted themselves to training day and night. This is a good thing. At least my ears are cleaner. Darren said calmly. The Tianlong incident greatly stimulated these two proud sons of heaven from this headquarters, the Navy's own powerlessness, its despair in the face of power, its self-blame and guilt for helping others do evil. These are enough to easily defeat a Navy's inner beliefs. In the O'Hara incident of the original plot, Kazan is the best example. From burning justice to lazy justice, Kazan experienced firsthand the paleness and powerlessness of the Navy's justice. Maybe, you go talk to them. That the expression on the flying squirrel's face was as if he was hesitating to speak, but finally he couldn't help but speak tentatively. He had seen with his own eyes Darren's ability to confuse and brainwash people. With his insight and understanding of human nature, he can always point out the truth of the matter. Leave the preaching to the old man from the Warring States period. I have no interest in raising children. Darren looked away from the two people in Guillaume and wrote lightly. If they can't even pass this hurdle, maybe they are not suitable to be a navy at all. The flying squirrel was silent for a moment, and finally sighed helplessly. This guy really sees things too clearly, but precisely because he sees things too clearly, he sometimes appears cold and heartless. Arrive. Just as the flying squirrel's thoughts were wandering, Darren's deep and powerful voice suddenly sounded. The flying squirrel immediately came to his senses and raised his head to look. On the distant sea, huge shadows gradually emerged from the sea fog. The battleships dragged by giant snails plowed long white marks on the sea. Their aura was solemn and domineering. The battle flag of Germa 66 flies at the top of the battleship. On the leading main battleship, a crossed eagle flag representing the Vinsmoke family stands proudly at the highest point. The densely packed fleet quickly gathered together following the main battleship's orders. The metal tracks and gears combined with each other, making a dull roar. In less than 3 minutes, dozens of warships combined to form a huge country, Germa 66. As expected of Germa 66, a war country that scares the world. The flying squirrel's eyes shone brightly, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Darren nodded in understanding. Although Germa 66 is vulnerable to him, that is because his devil fruit ability completely overcomes their technological power, which does not mean that Germa 66 is weak. In fact, the military strength of Germa 66 is ranked at the forefront even in the entire world. High-tech weapons, combat uniforms, replicants who are not afraid of death, freely combine national territories, and the ability to fight across the Red Earth continent. If you can get all these military technologies and apply them to your North Sea fleet, then you will have mastered a powerful military combat team that can fight across the Red Continent and easily enter the Great Channel or even the New World from the North Sea. Of course, what I wanted to get from Vinsmoke Gaji was far more than that. Take the string. With his eyes shining with a faint and profound light, Darren gave the order in a calm voice, so the flying squirrel raised his hand and made a military gesture, and all levels of navy on the warship quickly got into position. The rudder turned and the warship sailed smoothly into the port of the Kingdom of Germa. Gion and Cake also stopped their training at this time, tidied their military uniforms, and walked to the front of the army. They looked at Darren's broad and tall back with extremely complicated eyes. Ever since the Warring States General left Badia Island, the two of them didn't know how they felt. They were so embarrassed that they didn't dare to face Darren and avoided the latter almost every day. At this time, bang 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 bang. Bursts of dull cannon blasts suddenly exploded, interrupting Cake and Gion's chaotic thoughts. Shell attack. Cake put on a defensive posture with a vigilant look on his face, took a step forward, and protected Gion behind him. Don't worry, Gion, I will protect you. That he spoke righteously, and just as he was about to flip his hair handsomely, he found that the navy around him looked at him as if he were an idiot. Jiaji was stunned for a moment. Rows of colorful streams of light rose into the sky, scattering thousands of silver flowers in the clear sky. The brilliant light casts mottled colors on his face, making him look like a clown. This is salute, salute. Jiaji stared dumbfoundedly at the bright fireworks all over the sky. His lips opened and he couldn't say a word. Don't be nervous, Major Jiajie. Darren smiled and patted Jiaji on the shoulder, and then walked off the warship first. On the land of the Germa kingdom, rows of salutes continue to rise into the sky, dyeing the world with excitement and peace. Ha 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 ha. It's really an honor for me, Germa 66, to welcome Admiral Darren to the Kingdom of Germa. In a huge phalanx of the killing army, Vinsmoke Gaji, wearing a gorgeous robe and long golden hair, strode out and stretched out his hand towards the naval colonel with a smile on his face. I'm sorry to bother you, but Germa 66's style makes my heart swell no matter how many times I see it. Darren smiled and walked over. Their hands were clasped together in mid-air. Gion and Kaki watched this scene with trembling eyes. Seeing the enthusiastic smiles on Darren and Vinsmoke Gaji's faces, they couldn't help but curse two cunning bastards in their hearts. If they hadn't personally experienced the war that almost destroyed the country of Germa, they would have thought that these two guys were long-lost brothers. Ask for everything, thank you. Chapter 63. You can't test your power like this. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Kingdom of Germa, training course. Irrelevant personnel have been completely cleared out, and the clone soldiers of Germa 66 form a human wall, like cold sculptures, stationed around the training ground. The senior officers of the Beihai Navy, headed by Darren, stood in the center of the training ground and watched as Germa's soldiers carried heavy sealed boxes and moved them into the training ground. According to our cooperation plan, this is the first batch of military technology weapons you want. Vinsmoke Gaji said calmly, looking at Darren as he spoke. Although it is just a sample, the overall performance is basically stable. As long as you pass the acceptance test, it can be mass-produced at any time. But I have to remind you that high-tech weapons are not cheap. Darren lit a cigar, smiled and waved. Money is not an issue, just open the box. Vinsmoke Gaji then waved to the clone soldiers, and the soldiers strode forward, tore off the seal and opened the box. Darren and everyone immediately started to look at him. Various technological weapons are placed horizontally in wooden boxes, cushioned by dry straw. Vinsmoke Gaji casually picked up a cannon-like weapon with smooth lines. It was different from ordinary heavy cannons. The barrel of this weapon was thin and long, and the end was connected to a metal cylinder. This is a flamethrower that can emit flames at about 300 degrees. The attack distance is 30 meters and the continuous injection time is 15 minutes. It needs to be reloaded after the fuel is exhausted. As he spoke, he glanced at Darren and said, "Do you need to demonstrate your power?" Darren made a pleased gesture. Vinsmoke Gaji then shouted coldly, "Get out of the queue." Soon, a clone soldier wearing sunglasses strode out of the crowd, with his hands behind his back, standing like a rock in the center of the training ground. Seeing this scene, Guion and Cake's pupils shrank slightly. This guy, could he be using his own men to test the power of the weapon? As if to confirm their thoughts, Vinsmoke Gaji raised the muzzle of the flamethrower and aimed it at the clone soldier from a distance of 15 meters. The next second that he pulled the trigger without blinking an eye or expression. Roar. A hot fire tornado suddenly spurted out, drowning the clone soldier in an instant. Under the numb gazes of Cake and Guion, the clone soldier turned into a burning man under the burning flames. There was no wailing, no struggling, not even the slightest tremor in his body. In less than 5 seconds, pyro slowly fell, the flames lingered, smoke rose from the rotting corpses, and the embers slowly died out. The smell of burnt feathers filled the training ground. Gaji's face turned slightly pale. Guion felt nauseated. It's not like they haven't experienced war, but Vinsmoke Gaji's cruel method of using his subordinates for weapon testing was something they had never seen before. Smoke billows. Vinsmoke Gaji put down the flamethrower, turned around and looked at the naval captain proudly. How? Darren frowned. 300 degrees. The temperature of the flame depends on the factors of the fuel and the density of the combustion accelerant, air, and ranges from hundreds to thousands of degrees, but that's based on real-world data. In a world like Pirates, where the technology tree is extremely crooked, due to the lack of high-concentration fuel, the normal flame temperature is generally in the range of 200 to 900 degrees, limited by the world settings. This is also the limit. Temperature for burning fruits. The temperature of magma is between 900 degrees and 1400 degrees, so rock berries are the superior of yaki berries. The attack frequency is average, the attack range is average, and fuel needs to be filled. As for the power. Darren shook his head, looked at Vinsmoke Gaji and said, "You can't test the power of this thing at all. Researching and making weapons is your strength, but killing people is another matter. For the normal human body, if you want to kill a person, there is not much difference between a bullet, a dagger, and a sap." Having said this, Darren smiled. "And unfortunately, I have a lot of knowledge about killing." Vinsmoke Gaji was stunned for a moment, then said dissatisfied. "What do you mean?" Darren took a step forward, raised his hand to remove the black tie from the collar of the military uniform, took off the flawless white cloak of justice, and took off the upper body of the military uniform, revealing a body full of scars. Seeing his actions, Guion and Kaki both looked surprised and shocked. This guy, could he want to? The flying squirrel covered his face in pain. Vinsmoke Gaji also stared blankly at the naval colonel, who exuded a wild and violent temperament and was unable to react for a while. I saw Darren twisting his neck, making a crackling sound of fried beans, and then smiled ferociously. "Here, use me to test it." As he finished speaking, a strong wind swept through the training ground, causing the Navy's black hair to fly and his eyes to look even crazier. "Are you serious?" Vinsmoke Gaji asked with twitching eyes. Gaji also reacted suddenly and jumped out anxiously. Hey, Darren, this is no joke, that's a 300-degree flame. If I burn you alive, the position of Admiral of Beihai. But it's my turn. Ah no, I spilled the beans. He quickly covered his mouth. Darren suddenly realized and said. Well, Major Gaji is right. If that's the case, then I won't take the risk. Leave this glorious mission to the genius from this headquarters, Major Gaji. As he said that, he stretched out his big hand and grabbed Gaji by the back of his neck. No. It's better you do it. Gaji immediately retracted at an unprecedented speed, sweating profusely. Having made enough jokes, Darren looked at Vinsmoke Gaji again and said seriously. I was serious. He does mean it. Darren has trained his body to the point where he can withstand bullets and small and medium-sized artillery shells. He can withstand the impact heat generated by the explosion of artillery shells, so this 300-degree flamethrower should not be too dangerous. The most important thing is that with his perception talent, he can indeed clearly judge the destructive power of weapons by facing attacks directly. After all, the ultimate goal of the fleet he wants to build is not to make small fuss in the North Sea. In his vision, the military force under his command must at least have the combat power level of the New World pirates, so naturally, the power of the weapons equipped by this fleet must also reach a certain level. Seeing Darren's insistence, Vinsmoke Gaji no longer hesitated and pulled the trigger directly on him. Roar. In Cake and Guillaume's tightly contracted pupils, a long tongue of flame shot out from the jet, directly covering Darren's upper body. A rolling heat wave hit his face, and a scorching wind suddenly blew up in the training ground. Everyone present looked at the standing man bathed in red flames with expressions as if they had seen a ghost. Ask for everything. Thank you very much. Chapter 64. My child, please forgive me. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Crackling, the flames rose, and from a distance, Darren's upper body had turned into a ball of fire. The swirling flames distorted the surrounding air, making Guillaume and others tremble with fear. It took a full minute for Vinsmoke Gaji to slowly put down the flamethrower. What he didn't even notice was that a thin layer of cold sweat had appeared on his forehead at some point. Smoke billowed, obscuring vision. Golu. Gaji swallowed his saliva unconsciously, lowered his voice and said to the flying squirrel next to him. Hey, that guy won't be burned to death directly, right? The flying squirrel rolled his eyes angrily. At this moment, a faint voice came from the center of the thick smoke. Well, the power is pretty good. A gust of wind blew away the black smoke, and everyone looked with wide eyes, only to see Darren standing on the ground with lingering flames, lowering his head to observe the situation on his body. His body was covered with a layer of black ash, and black burn marks were faintly visible, but it could be seen from his expression that the injury was not serious. Well, at least not seriously to him. The flamethrower has passed the test. Darren patted the ashes on his skin and grinned at Vinsmoke Gaji. Next. He moved his eyes to Gaji and others again. Don't be idle, let's all experiment together, don't waste time. So one of the most thrilling and appalling experiments in the history of weapons manufacturing began. Flamethrower, thousands of volts of high-voltage current guns. Portable rocket launcher, high-speed cutting wheel. Repeating fire heavy machine gun. All kinds of technological weapons produced by Germa 66 were unleashed on the body of the naval colonel like an indiscriminate bombardment. The entire training ground was filled with dull roars, sharp cutting sounds and huge explosions, occasionally mixed with Gaji's cunning laughter. Everyone, including Vinsmoke Gaji, went from being dumbfounded at the beginning to becoming accustomed to it, and in the end they even directly entered a state of numbness. After half an hour, Gaji and the others panted, put down their last weapons, and sat down on the ground without any gesture. They looked at Darren with disbelief in their eyes. Monster! Vinsmoke Gaji raised his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead, and couldn't help but murmured with a pale face. Darren sat on a box of weapons with a satisfied look on his face, a lit cigar between his teeth. An accompanying military doctor was bandaging and treating the wounds on his body. Very good. Let's produce the weapons according to the ones we just determined. The deposit is 50% and the balance will be paid after receiving the goods. Darren smiled at Vinsmoke Gage. Vinsmoke Gaji said in a hoarse voice. No problem. At this time, he had clearly realized what a terrifying beast the top officer of the Beihai Navy in front of him was. After the accompanying military doctor simply bandaged it, Darren stood up slowly, put on the military uniform handed over by Flying Squirrel again, put on the snow-white cloak of justice, walked slowly to the side of Vinsmoke Gaji, and said in a low voice. In addition, regarding the issue of warship transformation. Vinsmoke Gaji looked troubled. Your requirements are too high. If the keel of the warship is replaced with metal, the weight of the warship will be at least doubled. As a result, the draft of the warship will probably. Darren waved his hand disapprovingly. No, you don't need to worry about the draft. His deep, dark eyes sparkled with some strange and fierce fire of ambition. What I need is that the main structure of the warship must be made of lightweight metal. Vinsmoke Gaji frowned and muttered. If that's the case, there should be no problem doping steel with a small amount of alloys used to make combat uniforms. But in terms of funds. He glanced at Darren, it's absolutely an astronomical figure. What I want is your words. Darren laughed, money is just a pile of waste paper left in your hands, only when you spend it and actually use it to improve your own strength is the right way to go. The warship set sail and slowly made its way out of the port of the Kingdom of Germa. Vinsmoke Gaji stood on the land, waving to the retreating warship with a smile on his face, until the warship disappeared at the end of the distant sea. The smile on his face gradually turned cold and ferocious. Sir, all the Beihai Navy's deposit has been put into the safe. A middle-aged man dressed as a butler came over respectfully and whispered. Vinsmoke Gaji nodded gloomily. He did not speak, but waved his hand to let the butler man leave, and walked alone towards the main castle of the Germa kingdom. Vinsmoke Gaji passed through the heavily guarded gate of the main castle building and entered a heavily guarded passage. At the end of the passage is a metal door. He stepped forward, aimed his eyes at the electronic panel on the metal door, and stretched out his hand to hold down the door guard. The iris verification passed, the bloodline verification passed. Welcome back, sir. A cold, emotionless electronic sound sounded, the door then opened, and Vinsmoke Gaji strode in. Behind the metal door is a laboratory that is as big as several footballs. Rows of huge test tubes are displayed in front of you, slowly rotating with the operation of the machine. The huge 3-meter-high test tube was filled with green liquid, and human bodies were floating in the liquid. It was clearly Germa's clone soldier. Vinsmoke Gaji stood in front of a silver console, staring expressionlessly at the rotating green test tube. Suddenly, he punched the console hard. Boom! Damn! He roared through gritted teeth, his eyes filled with dense bloodshot eyes, and his expression was ferocious and twisted. Shame! What a shame! He was panting heavily, his chest heaving, and his eyes almost bursting with fire. I miss my great king of Germa kingdom, the supreme commander of the evil army, and now he has become a lowly and humble arms dealer. Rogers Darren, does he really think that the Germa kingdom is his arms supplier? He even had the idea of a combat uniform. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Vinsmoke Gaji kept roaring and punched out one punch after another, leaving clear punch marks on the metal panel console. His bloodshot eyes stared intently at the rows of gestating clone soldiers, with a look of reluctance on his face. I feel extremely angry inside. The incident just now was said to be a weapon test, but how could Vinsmoke Gaji not know that it was a warning given to him by that bastard Darren? He wanted to show his power with a crushing and strong stance. Vinsmoke Gaji gasped for breath, and his vicious eyes kept scanning the experiment. Clone soldiers, numbers mean nothing to that guy. The battle uniform that Germa is proud of, various high-tech weapons, perfectly restrained by that guy's devil fruit ability. The ferocious look of Rogers Darren when he was experimenting with weapons made him look like an out-and-out monster. Monsters. Is there any way to deal with monsters? A trace of despair came into Vinsmoke Gaji's eyes. Is there really no way to fight against that guy? At this time, a call suddenly sounded from the microphone. Sir, Mrs. Sora's amniotic water has broken and she will give birth soon. Please come over. Vinsmoke Gaji was stunned. Sora, that's his wife is pregnant and will give birth soon. and he, the king of Germa, will also usher in his first bloodline. A rare touch of tenderness appeared on the cruel face of Vinsmoke Gaji. My bloodline. He whispered softly. My bloodline. He was suddenly struck by lightning, the next second. Ha 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 ha. That's it. I found a way to deal with you. Darren. Vinsmoke Gaji suddenly threw his head back and laughed crazily. Blood factor, transformation. I should have thought of it a long time ago. Only monsters can deal with monsters. As if he had grasped the last straw, he stumbled madly to the other side of the laboratory and grabbed a pink test tube. The transparent test tube filled with pink liquid reflected his increasingly crazy face. My child, please forgive me. This is for Germa's honor. He hissed, Jia Genha, asking for everything, grateful. Chapter 65 Vinsmoke Reiju. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Vinsmoke Gaji's almost crazy raving slowly echoed in the cold laboratory. Only monsters can deal with monsters. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on the test tube filled with pink liquid in his hand, but in his mind he kept recalling the scene of the Navy using only its own body for defense and remaining unscathed under the hail of bullets. Skin enhancement. No, skin and flesh alone are far from being able to do this. Invulnerable defense, powerful body recovery, and beast-like strength. Yes, only an exoskeleton can do this. He murmured, his eyes flashing with a strange and crazy cold light, and dialed the bug signal. Sir, are you here? Mrs. Sora is calling your name, the labor is about to begin. The housekeeper's extremely anxious voice came from the phone bug. Vinsmoke Gaji gritted his teeth, his expression changed, and finally he got worried and roared. Tell the doctor to wait, I need some time. After saying that, he hung up the phone directly. After carefully placing the pink liquid test tube on the test table, Vinsmoke Gaji roughly swept all the instruments and other debris on the operating table to the ground with one hand. With a crackling sound, he took out a pen and paper and started calculating quickly. The ratio of blood factors, well, exoskeleton alone is not enough, toxicity must also be added. Drops of cold sweat dripped down his cheeks and chin, but he ignored it. In 1 minute, the piece of white paper was filled with dense calculation formulas and potion mixing ratios. Let's start. With a hoarse murmur, he pressed the button on the console. The various instruments on the experimental table were running quickly, constantly injecting various pharmaceuticals and substances in determined proportions into the pink test tube. Soon the liquid in the test tube began to boil and bubbles appeared. Success. Seeing that the instrument indicator light on the control table showed green, Vinsmoke Gaji clenched his fists, took the test tube from the experimental table, and strode out of the laboratory towards the palace. Passing through the long corridors and palace gardens, Vinsmoke Gaji heard painful wails the moment he entered the palace. It was his wife's voice. Sora. He murmured anxiously, quickened his pace and entered a bedroom that was luxuriously decorated with painted murals. Large expanses of white sheets were now stained red with blood, and doctors and nurses in white coats were busy running around. A woman with beautiful appearance and gentle temperament was lying on a large soft bed. The severe pain caused by childbirth made her tremble all over and sweat profusely. Master, you are finally here. The doctor wearing rimless glasses stopped what he was doing and bowed to Vinsmoke Gaji. Vinsmoke Gaji waved his hand, walked quickly to the bed, and held his wife's hand tightly. Sora, I'm coming. Queen Sola of the Germa Kingdom opened her eyelids with difficulty. A gentle smile appeared on her face, and she murmured softly. Gaji. Gaji. Vinsmoke Gaji felt his heart tighten when he saw his wife's painful expression. He took a deep breath. Sora, I have found a way for Germa to rise again and dominate the North Sea. He held up a test tube with pink liquid flowing in his hand. Bloodline factor. With this technology, our children will have monster-like physical talents from birth. Our children will become the most powerful warriors in the history of Germa 66. The name of the Vinsmoke family will inevitably accompany their growth and resound throughout the sea, he said excitedly, looking forward to his wife's joy, but what greeted him was a pair of stunned and horrified eyes. You want to raise our children into weapons. Queen Sola said in disbelief, her face turned pale. As the Queen of Germa, she is very aware of the drawbacks of the technology mastered by Vinsmoke Gaji, just like the army of clone soldiers in Germa 66. Those who use this blood factor technology will lose all human emotions and will be unable to disobey the orders of the family leader Vinsmoke Gaji. Vinsmoke Gaji was stunned when he heard this. No, Sora. The frightened look his wife cast on him made him feel unfamiliar as never before, and he finally relented and said, I will preserve the emotions of our children. But our children will still become weapons in your hands, right? Vinsmoke Gaji opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a word of rebuttal. He fell silent. The unruly face of Admiral Beihai still appeared repeatedly in his mind. This is for the glory of Germa. That his voice suddenly turned cold, and it was so cold and unfamiliar. I saw the owner of Vinsmoke slowly stand up, with his back to his beloved wife who was lying on the hospital bed in tears of disappointment, clenched his fists, and hissed. Only in this way can Germa dominate the North Sea again. I'm sorry, Sora. He whispered in a very soft voice. Then, amid his wife's cries, Vinsmoke Gaji handed the pink test tube to the doctor. His bloodshot eyes were filled with sadness, and he gritted his teeth and said, Inject this test tube drug into Madam, and then, start labor. After saying this, he just strode out of the bedroom without looking back. Half an hour later, Vinsmoke Gaji, who was pacing irritably outside the royal palace and waiting silently, finally heard a beautiful baby cry. Congratulations, sir, your wife has successfully given birth to a girl. A doctor wearing a white coat and a mask came out with a baby girl covered in blood and said respectfully to Vinsmoke Gaji. Vinsmoke Gaji was startled. He stared blankly at the baby girl in the doctor's arms, subconsciously took it and held it in his arms. She has long pink hair covering her right eye, a counterclockwise eyebrow on her left eyebrow, and her purple pupils look particularly smart. It's just that, sir, my lady's skin is extremely tough and the needle cannot penetrate it. I'm afraid she won't be able to get the vaccine. The doctor was confused. Vinsmoke Gaji was stunned for a moment when he heard this, and then an indescribable ecstasy surged into his heart. Ha 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 ha. He couldn't help but burst out laughing like crazy. The experiment was successful. It really worked. He was born with a superhuman body. No, there is no need to vaccinate. My daughter is a born monster. Ha 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 ha. This day, in the kingdom of Germa in the North Sea, the Vinsmoke family gave birth to their first royal descendant. King Germa and the commander of the evil army, Vinsmoke Gaji, gave him the name Vinsmoke Reiju. I went to a big hospital to see a specialist, and it turned out it was not bronchitis, but pneumonia caused by impotence. I was drunk. Take good care of yourself, and updates will be maintained as normal. If there are additional updates, I can only say that I will do my best. Good luck. Chapter 66 Special Training. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. North Sea, Branch 321, the sun is scorching hot on the school grounds, and yellow sand is flying. Three figures with astonishing momentum were launching a fierce attack on a black-haired marine standing in the center of the school field. Their speed and strength had reached the extreme, and their coordination with each other was almost perfect. The three sides of the snow-white cloak, representing the rank of major of the headquarters, continued to flutter and flutter along with the three people's offensive. The man who was besieged by them had a wild and unruly aura. His upper body was naked, revealing muscles that were as sharp as a knife. He had a smile on his face and looked relaxed as he faced the stormy attack of the three men. It is clear that Gion, Kaki and Flying Squirrel are besieging Darren. However, despite their numerical advantage, the foreheads of the three people in Gion were covered with fine cold sweat, as if they were under great pressure. They were clearly the ones launching the attack, but it felt as if Darren was beating the three of them alone. Too weak, Jia Ji, haven't you eaten? Your weak fists are just like scratching an itch. Darren let out a mocking laugh, which made the panting Gaji furious. Darren, you bastard. What did you say? A sharp sound of breaking through the air sounded from behind, and the sense of threat was approaching infinitely. Darren turned sideways to avoid the sword light slashed from behind by Flying Squirrel and Gion, and said with a joking smile on his face. Isn't it? Soft, can you do it, little dog? That while speaking, the naval colonel also deliberately glanced at Kaji's crotch. The deep meaning in his eyes was enough to make every strong-blooded man furious. Darren, you are looking for death. I will fight with you. Sure enough, the next second, Jia Ji's thunderous roars could be heard on the school grounds. The skin of his body was filled with steaming heat, white smoke was spurting out from his nostrils, and his figure was charging towards Darren like a wild bull. The explosive force of stepping on the ground even caused a huge crater with a diameter of more than 5 meters to explode on the ground. Jia Jia's speed suddenly climbed to the extreme, flying across the sky like a cannonball. Boom. There was a muffled sound. Jia Ji looked at Darren in astonishment, his head raised high after being hit in the face by his own punch. Looking at the splattered blood, he couldn't react for a moment. It actually hit. But the next second, his pupils shrank instantly. I saw Darren with his head raised high, and the corner of his mouth with a blood stain suddenly raised a happy smile. Instead of the anger and pain of being hit and injured, I felt the smile of encountering an interesting toy. Very good intensity. The voice of paranoia and excitement slowly sounded, but it fell in Jiaji's mind like a devil's whisper. The corner of his eye twitched, and a bad premonition came into his heart. Could it be? Darren grinned. Boom. He hit Jiaji directly and roughly on the head. Blood splattered, and Jiaji immediately felt his eyes spinning. Before he could recover, a large hand wearing a black leather glove kept enlarging in his blurred vision. Don't slap me in the face. Jiaji whined. Darren turned a deaf ear and grabbed his face with one hand, lifted him up and slammed him into the ground. Boom! The ground within a radius of 30 meters suddenly shattered into dense cracks, and the earth let out an overwhelmed wail. Smoke and dust billowed, and Jiaji's upper body was completely submerged under the ground, and his 2 hairy legs wearing wooden clogs twitched in mid-air. Kang! At this moment, the sound of a saber being unsheathed suddenly exploded. A shining saber first pierced the swirling smoke, and then brought out the flying squirrel's resolute and calm face wearing a military cap. The broad cloak fluttered behind him, and the flying squirrel's eyes were piercing. He held the saber tightly with both hands and slashed it down towards Darren. Perfect timing. Laugh. The saber that swallowed the sword light slashed down sharply, cutting out a large amount of blood on Darren's chest. Well, I've made a lot of progress. There was a shocking blood mark on his chest, but Darren looked at the flying squirrel in front of him with admiration as if nothing was wrong. The flying squirrel smiled bitterly and calmly received Darren's powerful and heavy knee strike. Boom. His figure flew backwards like a cannonball, knocking down 3 human-shaped stone targets one after another before falling to the ground in a panic, vomiting blood. As soon as the blow was successful, Darren felt a cold chill approaching infinitely from the sky above his head. The sharp aura even made him feel like his pores were standing up. He is truly worthy of being a candidate for the future general. His talent in swordsmanship is indeed quite astonishing, Darren murmured in his mind, smiling and reaching out with one hand. Kang! The golden famous knife suddenly struck Darren's palm, cutting open the black glove, but it was stuck there, tightly imprisoned by the latter. The biting wind blew the smoke and dust into a mess. I saw Guillaume's figure leaping high in the air, holding a knife in both hands and opening his stance. The cloak behind him was fluttered by the continuous bursts of air waves, almost perpendicular to the ground. She looked at the naval captain in front of her who was giving her a cynical smile, and suddenly burst into a low roar. The famous sword Jinbilyuo instantly bloomed with unprecedented brilliance. It tried its best to resist Darren's inhuman strength, and kept slashing down with the help of the explosive force from top to bottom. That knife, there is only a small distance away from hitting the Navy captain's chest. However, even if Guillaume tried his best, he could not complete this final attack. In the end, even pressing down a centimeter became so difficult. Like a luxury, Darren didn't hold back anymore. The iron-like palm suddenly exerted force, and the collision between the fingers and the blade even made a clear sound like gold and iron clashing. He pulled aggressively, when Guillaume suddenly lost her balance and was stunned. A fist hit her abdomen hard. Boom. White air ripples exploded on her back. Guillaume's face suddenly turned pale, his whole body slipped down, and he knelt on the ground with his hands covering his abdomen, blood oozing from his mouth. The dazzling blood kept dripping from Darren's wounds to the ground. and was quickly absorbed by the dust in the school grounds, forming dark brown traces. A smile appeared on Darren's face, looking at Guillaume, Khaki, and Flying Squirrel who were lying on the ground in front of them and gasping for air. Well, that's all for today's training. He blinked under the pain mask expressions of the three. Continue tomorrow. After saying that, he turned around and strode towards the base director's office. The Flying Squirrel rubbed his temples in distress. Guillaume lay flat on the ground, gasping for air, still holding the long knife tightly in his hand. Jiaji couldn't help but wailed and cursed angrily. Hateful. Today, half a month has passed since I went to the Kingdom of Germa to test weapons. Since that day, Darren, a bastard, pulled them into special training every day, which he said was to help them improve their strength, but Jiaji always felt that bastard was torturing food in different ways. Ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 67 Life is Simple. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In the evening, the base director's office. Darren was still naked from the waist down, holding a lit cigar in his mouth. He stood in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling glass window, overlooking the entire situation of the 321st branch. One warship after another is carrying out daily patrols around the island according to a fixed route. The figures of the Navy training are looming on the school grounds, and bursts of shouts and beatings are heard from time to time. Navy soldiers in military uniforms carry out daily preparation and maintenance on forts and docked warships. The setting sun shines in from the floor-to-ceiling glass window, reflecting on the tall figure of the naval colonel, casting a long shadow. Smoke shrouded his face, making his eyes look even deeper. The progress of strength is indeed getting slower and slower. At a certain moment, Darren exhaled a stream of smoke and sighed helplessly. He looked down at the wounds on his palms and chest. The wound has completely scabbed over, and I estimate that after a good night's sleep, I'll feel better when I wake up tomorrow. His superhuman physique gave him strong defense and also greatly enhanced his own recovery power. The regular training in the past has basically been unable to improve his various statistics. Simply put, it means that the body has completely adapted to this intensity of external stress and stimulation. So after he came back from the Germa Kingdom, he decided to rope in Flying Squirrel, Guillaume and Khaki for special training. On the one hand, it can help them realize their talents faster and improve their strength. On the other hand, it also puts new pressure and stimulation on yourself, with the three of them joining forces. Although it was far from enough to put enough pressure on Darren, when fighting and sparring with them, the various data of his body finally loosened and increased. In any case, the talents of the three Flying Squirrels are among the best in the entire sea. Thinking of this, Darren gradually became immersed in his mind, and through the talent of perception, he had a clear insight into his physical condition, and thus obtained his own data panel. Physical fitness, 61.753. Strength, 57.192. Speed, 59.241. Fruit, 72.111. In addition to devil fruit abilities, the physical, strength and speed values have increased by 0.5 to 0.8 in the past month, but have stagnated indefinitely. Most of them benefited from the special training with the three people in the past 10 days. As for the development of devil fruits, progress is even slower. Tuck tuck tuck. At this time, a gentle knock on the door suddenly sounded, interrupting Darren's meditation. Come in. He whispered back. The door to the office was pushed open, and a Flying Squirrel wearing a straight military uniform and a military cap strode in. Darren poured a glass of ice-cold whiskey and handed it to the Flying Squirrel, smiling. How do you feel? The Flying Squirrel took the wine glass and grinned bitterly. It's not that great. Not everyone is like a lunatic like you, who likes to enjoy the pleasure of fighting in pain. In the past 10 days of special training, he had not had a good night's sleep at all. After the special training every day, all the bones in his body seemed to fall apart. Even lying in bed, my muscles ached terribly. Darren shrugged and smiled. Pain is a good thing, it reminds you that you are alive. And in battle, using my own body to feel the opponent's attack allows me to more clearly perceive the opponent's strength, speed, physique, and even will, so as to find flaws. The Flying Squirrel rolled his eyes angrily. He picked up the wine glass, raised his head and drank it all. Darren is like this. Many times he is able to avoid the opponent's attacks with his own speed and instant burst. But he is often unwilling to do so. the roughness and wildness of his fighting style were in sharp contrast to the flexibility, cunning and smoothness of his political skills. Between dodge and head-on collision, he always chooses the latter. This is the fighting style he has developed over the years, perhaps also influenced by his former boss Sakazuki. He likes to trade injuries for injuries and fight for his life against his opponents at the most dangerous moments. This kind of person is the most difficult opponent you would never want to encounter, like a crazy, hungry wolf. Even if the internal organs are shattered, even if my hands and feet are broken, before dying, it will also smile ferociously and use its remaining sharp teeth to bite off a piece of flesh from its opponent. Hearing the flying squirrel's complaints, Darren smiled disapprovingly and gave him another glass of wine. It is not a good habit to dodge in battle. It will make you cowardly, timid, and hesitant. Once you develop the habit of dodging in combat, you will subconsciously rely on it, and it will be easy for the enemy to predict your movements. If you are used to leaving a retreat in battle, you may have a retreat, but you also lose the chance of winning. Having the habit of dodging is not a good thing for the growth of personal strength. Will, courage, determination to win, crisis between life and death, these are the biggest keys to improving combat power. After thinking about it, Darren couldn't help but add. There is only one Pollusolino in this sea. The sinister face of that monster came to mind, and even though he was as serious as a flying squirrel, he couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. He sighed and said with emotion. But every time you fight for your life without leaving any retreat, how many lives do you have to fight for? Darren picked up the wine glass and took a sip. Who knows? His deep eyes drifted to the distant sea, the smoke of his cigar lingered around his flawless and stern profile, and his steady and powerful voice echoed in the empty office. But you only live once, and I just want to live it happily. I think life is actually very simple, either go forward or go back. Backing off, naturally won't be a problem. Even when it happens for the first time, you will hypocritically comfort yourself, it's okay, the patience will pass, just for a while, hide away for a while, and then find the place again, but in fact, after the second time, once, there will be a second time. You retreat again and again, you dodge again and again, you compromise again and again, can you still be the same person? There are too many reasons to retreat and only one reason to move forward, but this one is enough. A smile gradually appeared on Darren's lips. I would rather die than lose. He clenched his fists. I want to win. The flying squirrel fell silent, listening to these meaningful words. It was clear to him that Darren was talking about more than just fighting. Isn't the meaning of these words a reflection of the choices Darren has made countless times in the past? One step back, this is true when fighting, faced with the world's leading military power, Germa 66, this is the case, the same is true when facing the supreme power of the celestial dragon. The 4 words suffering have never been in Darren's life dictionary. Ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 68 Fair Game. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After a long silence, the flying squirrel let out a long breath. He once again looked at Darren's back standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, and in a trance he seemed to see the soul of this scum of the Navy that everyone said was contained in his body riddled with holes. Rebellious, ever-moving soul, yes, precisely because he is such a man, only then can he be. And the person he is willing to follow for the rest of his life. Those two guys have improved a lot lately. Darren suddenly changed the subject. His eyes moved to the school grounds in the distance. On the school grounds under the setting sun, the yellow sand dances wildly. In addition to the naval soldiers of the 321st branch undergoing daily training, there are 2 figures that attract special attention. A man stood on the left side of the school ground, holding a long knife, with a cloak flying behind him, holding his breath and concentrating, and kept swinging the knife. The golden famous sword was as wild as the wind, passing out bright lights and shadows. With Darren's eyesight, he could clearly see that as the golden sword danced wildly, countless sparks continuously collided and spawned on the edge of the blade. That's a bullet. Astonishingly, Guillaume was relying on his own swordsmanship training to cut bullets fired from dozens of meters away in half with incomparable accuracy. On the other side of the school grounds, Gigi, whose face was flushed, was dragging a small abandoned warship forward with great difficulty, gritting his teeth. The muscles all over his body were tense and bulging, and his veins were exposed as if they were about to explode. He was still mumbling something. "I'm not a thin dog. I'm not a thin dog." The flying squirrel followed Darren's gaze and also smiled and said, "They have been tortured by you to the point where they have a shadow. Why don't they keep talking about wanting to become stronger every day? They have indeed become a lot stronger, they just haven't realized this fact yet." While speaking, he glanced at Darren and added in his mind, "After all, you are the one who is sparring with them." Darren smiled and said, "Forget Guion, she has always been a good student in the eyes of the old man from the Warring States period. What I didn't expect was that Jiaji, a seemingly unreliable guy, could have such resilience." The flying squirrel agreed with deep understanding. "Major Jiaji has unusual abilities. After the daily special training, he will also practice various items by himself, and the amount of training seriously exceeds the standard. Obviously, you were the most welcome during the special training, and I was dragged all over with injuries, but the next day I was always full of energy and showed up on the school field alive and kicking. After being ravaged by you dozens of times and hundreds of times, he never gets discouraged. No matter what happens, he has the courage to fight despite repeated defeats. I have to admit that he is indeed admirable. Well, that's what he focuses on, it's always weird. Strange." Darren raised his eyebrows and turned to look at the flying squirrel curiously. A helpless smile appeared on the flying squirrel's face. "Recently, there have been a lot of comments from the branch, saying that Major Jiaji appears too frequently in the dormitories of female soldiers. Darren, as expected of you, Jiaji, in fact, there was one thing that flying squirrel didn't dare to say, and that was that Jiaji often went to various aristocratic parties in the name of caring for the people, and finally came back disgraced, still enjoying it." Darren shook his head and asked, "How's that little Dover kid doing lately?" The flying squirrel's face became solemn and he said in a deep voice, "The progress is very fast. In just half a month, he has taken over 30% of the mafia territory and underground business in Beihai. The size of the Don Quixote family has also surpassed it in one fell swoop, reaching nearly 2,000 people. Scale. Doflamingo is indeed very capable. He suppresses those who resist, uses the bloodiest means to intimidate, shows mercy to those who kneel and surrender, and constantly gathers his subordinates. At the same time, he restrains his subordinates and avoids harming civilians as much as possible. Cause damage. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that he was just a 12-year-old kid. And, his methods always remind me of another person." When he said the last sentence, his tone was extremely complicated. "Who?" "You." Darren suddenly laughed. "So, I did make the right choice of him as my godson." He shook his head and said, "But there should be a but behind your words, right?" The flying squirrel was stunned when he heard this, then smiled bitterly and said, "I really can't hide anything from you." Darren picked up the glass and took a sip of whiskey. "Tell me about it. After all, this is the North Sea, and the underground world in this sea area is very tough." The flying squirrel said slowly, "Yes, although the expansion of the Don Quixote family is very rapid, it is precisely because Doflamingo's rise is so rapid and so dazzling that it makes the mafia forces entrenched in other territories in the North Sea wary. Stand up. Under common pressure, they have torn up their agreement with our navy, constantly recruiting troops, frantically staging turf wars and bloodshed, trying to expand their power to counter the rise of the Don Quixote family." Darren narrowed his eyes. "I thought they would be more competitive." Seeing his micro-expression, Flying Squirrel's heart suddenly tightened. He knew someone was going to be in trouble. "You mean," that the naval colonel sneered. "If they can put aside their prejudices and unite to fight against the Don Quixote family, I will not interfere in this power struggle in the underground world. After all, they gave me enough respect. The rules of the game are fair. The Don Quixote family broke the rules of Beihai. I killed all his thousands of men as punishment. If he wants to become the overlord of the Beihai underground world, he must start from scratch. I won't give him any help. He has to prove his ability. The Don Quixote family vs the underground forces of the entire North Sea, this is my idea. If he fails and can't even take Beihai, it proves that he is only at this level. It's just that what I didn't expect was, the underground forces in Beihai are so disappointing. They dared to break the agreement, break my rules, attack civilians, and take advantage of the chaos to plunder territory. Darren's eyes narrowed further. I'm not happy. The flying squirrel took a deep breath. When to set off, he didn't ask too many details or reasons, because it's not important, because in the North Sea, no one can disobey Darren's rules. As for the so-called fair game, there is no such thing as a truly fair game. The banker will also take action personally, it just means that the game will be over in an instant. After all, in Beihai, the so-called underground world is just a matter of Darren's words. Let's go now, give my lovely godson a small gift. Darren pulled his uniform off the hanger and put it on neatly. After all, my time to stay in Beihai is running out. The flying squirrel was startled. Have you reached the bottleneck? He was roughly aware of Darren's special talent, and also understood that the latter was trying to improve his physical limits through various hellish trainings. Darren nodded and admitted. Yes, I need a stronger opponent. It doesn't make much sense to continue to stay in the North Sea. The Great Waterway is the most exciting stage in this sea. Navy Headquarters Officer Training Camp. There, he will compete with naval elites from all over the world, gain the inheritance of a naval admiral, and master the superhuman skills of the 6th Navy, as well as the most powerful ability on the sea, domineering. As he spoke, Darren had already put on his black tie, he put on a wide, white navy cloak, he looked coldly and said. Before I leave, completely unify the underground world of Beihai. Ask for everything and be grateful. I haven't been feeling well recently, so the update time is not stable, but I will try my best to ensure normal updates. Chapter 69 Greetings. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. North Sea, Beihai Island, late at night, blood and fire reflected the sky red, bang 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 bang. Boom. The roar of gunfire rang out violently in the streets as hundreds of Marines launched an onslaught around a mafia family's garrison. Thick smoke billowed, and the thick barriers at the station were blasted with shocking gaps one after another by the incoming artillery fire, causing rocks to fly. Damn Navy! Where did their weapons come from? A mafia cadre wearing a black suit crawled out from under the collapsed wall, his face covered in blood, his eyes red and roaring. As the leading mafia force on Beihai Island, the Snooker family controls more than half of the underground industry within hundreds of nautical miles of the island. Their business scope includes illegal businesses such as brewing, smuggling, gambling and customs. They control the situation in this sphere of influence, make money every day, have hundreds of members under their command, and have muskets and explosives as weapons. Even some small and medium-sized pirate groups dare not easily provoke the Snooker family, but everything went haywire in an instant. The prosperous, beautiful and intoxicating life was completely shattered and disillusioned by the roar of the explosion. An explosion woke York Snooker up from his chaotic sleep. Countless attacks whizzed past his ears, and he couldn't even tell what the sound was. The family station, the arsenal, the courtyard, the conference room, the chamber of commerce, the ground, the buildings, the air, everything was trembling. Under the continuous and indiscriminate bombardment, the cadres of the Snooker family were unable to react at all, and were directly buried in the ruins by fierce firepower. York Snooker only felt his ears buzzing and then became numb. He stared blankly at the well-trained Beihai Navy, armed with various weapons, methodically surrounding their family's station and crushing everything, and felt extremely frightened. High-temperature flamethrower, a stun gun that spits out blue lightning, portable machine gun. York Snooker even saw a row of Marines each carrying a rocket on their shoulders. Cutting-edge weapons never seen before. Boom! A portable small missile suddenly exploded overhead, and the dome-shaped building of the church was immediately blown to pieces, leaving a mess. Amidst the loud noise, a large number of stones fell apart and collapsed. The huge shadow suddenly flooded down towards York Snooker from top to bottom. There was a hint of despair in his eyes, before he was submerged by the boulder flow, he saw a wretched-looking marine wearing wooden clogs walking out of the crowd with his hands in his pockets, and then, lifting up a residential building abruptly, boom. Residential buildings were thrown high and crashed to the ground, completely destroying the Snooker family's residence into a mess, like ruins. In the billowing black smoke, Jiaji looked at his hands in a daze. When did I become so strong? He just wanted to try it at first, but he didn't expect that he could actually throw a residential building away with his bare hands. Major Jiaji is too strong. Germa's technological weapons are still far inferior to the power of Major Kaji. It's so strong. You are worthy of being the elite of this department. The surrounding Beihai Navy stared at Jiaji with shock on their faces, and they all cheered wildly. Listening to the cheers of the Navy around him, Jiaji suddenly felt excited and couldn't help but put his hands on his hips and burst into laughter. Of course. I'm a genius. He glanced disdainfully at the repeating machine gun held by a marine and said disdainfully. The gun is such a primitive and vulgar way of fighting. At the same time, another island in the North Sea, a similar scene is taking place, a mafia family's secret base. Naval forces quickly launched operations. Navy. Damn Navy. You are not leaving any way for us to survive. A mafia leader with a mustache cursed angrily. As he spoke, he held a giant shield made of fine steel in both hands and slammed into the oncoming Navy crowd like a bull. The powerful force directly made them fall over. Ha 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 ha. Have you seen my power? The mafia leader laughed, but his laughter stopped abruptly the next second. Kang. He heard a crisp sword cry. Looking around, he saw a tall black-haired figure slowly walking out of the blazing sea of fire. The sound of high heels hitting the ground was pleasant, but it conveyed an ultimate coldness. That's a woman. There is a beauty mark at the corner of her mouth. Her long black hair is tied up in a bun on the back of her head, and her curvy body is wrapped in a pink skirt. Following her footsteps, the flawless white navy cape behind her seemed to be swaying and dancing. In the flames, she was holding a long knife in one hand. The blade is long and slender, showing a bright golden color, reflecting the movement of the flames. This is a very exciting woman. If it were normal times, the mafia leader would probably try his best to get her into bed and conquer her, but now, he didn't have any idea. A long, thin cut slowly began to spread from his giant metal shield. The strongest front of the shield, to his arms, to his throat, bloodlines slowly emerged. What a fast knife! He hissed. The shield and the man were split into two and collapsed. Guillaume stood in front of him, sheathing his sword with a cold expression. In the name of justice, impose the death penalty. As soon as she finished speaking, the navy swarmed in behind her. Cries of death and wails continued to come from all directions. Guillaume stood there and fell into deep thought for a long time. I have become a lot stronger. She murmured softly. She suddenly understood a lot. The special training over the past 10 days has improved her strength by at least 30%. It's just because her opponent has always been that monster-like guy, always dominated, and always so far away, that she didn't notice the improvement in her strength. But the contemplation only lasted a few seconds, and Guillaume quickly clenched his fists again and gritted his silver teeth. Not enough, far from it. The other side, an expensive private luxury mansion, the famous mafia family in the Great Britain Islands of the North Sea, the residence of the leader of the Rockefeller family. In the luxurious bedroom, the leader of the Rockefeller family, German, suddenly woke up from his sleep, suddenly pulled out the pistol hidden under the pillow, and fired several shots at a shadow in the room without looking. Bang bang bang. Clang clang clang. The sound of bullets hitting swords was heard, and sparks flew everywhere, illuminating a serious face wearing a military cap. Germance's pupils shrank. It's you. His mistress shrank back with fear on her face and pulled the quilt tighter around her. The figure of the flying squirrel stepped out of the darkness. He held a saber in his hand. The saber was dripping with blood. You broke the rules. The flying squirrel said expressionlessly. So, the Supreme Commander of the North Sea, Rogers Darren, sends you my greetings. As the words fell, a cold light flashed in the darkness. Laugh. The splattered blood dyed the Chinese tent red. The next second. Ah 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 ah. The woman's terrified screams echoed throughout the mansion. Ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 70 The Greatest Darkness in the North Sea. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It is the largest and most economically prosperous commercial port in the North Sea, Port of Taz. When Doflamingo led many members of the Don Quixote family into the harbor of Taz port, what they saw was the following scene. Various ships were vying for territory in the port, sails with different markings rolled like waves, sailors shouted loudly on the deck, nobles and wealthy businessmen chewed pipes and directed the workers on the shore, and the shouts drowned out the sound of the waves. Far away from the port, the streets are lined with various shops, bustling with people, and a dazzling array of goods from the North Sea and even all over the world. Looking down the street, a city seems to gradually expand with distance. The densely intertwined inland rivers are like white horses, shuttling between large buildings and houses. Prosperous, wealthy, crowded, dirty, everywhere is filled with the mixed smell of money and rancidity. I said, it really deserves to be the largest trading port in the North Sea. Torpol, with a line of snot hanging from his nostrils, said with surprise on his face. There should be plenty of oil and water here. Diamanti, whose face was painted with color, licked the corners of her mouth. Virgo said nothing, with half a piece of bread on his cheek. Pica laughed shrilly and said, soon this place will belong to our Don Quixote family. Their faces were filled with intense ambition and arrogance. Of course, they also have the qualifications to be arrogant. In just half a month, their Don Quixote family almost started from scratch and annexed more than 30% of the Mafia territory and underground world business in the entire North Sea. With an unstoppable attitude, they directly jumped into the North Sea area. One of the best underworld forces in the country. This kind of speed, this kind of attitude, this kind of domineering attitude, no one has ever been able to achieve it in the history of Beihai. But they, the Quixote family, did it, and now, the prosperous trading port in front of them is the goal of their trip. The Rodriguez family. Doflamingo stood on the bow of the ship, scanning the bustling and lively town in front of him, and a cold smile gradually appeared on his lips. He still looks old-fashioned, wearing sunglasses, a shirt, cropped pants, and pointed shoes. It's just that compared to before, he has an extra pink feather coat on his body, which is fluttering in the salty sea breeze on the harbor like a young and arrogant flamingo. Dover. I said, as long as we kill the Rodriguez family and annex all their properties, we can own half of the underground world in Beihai, right? Treble walked tremblingly to Doflamingo's side, leaning on his cane, and chuckled obscenely. Doflamingo nodded and said with a ferocious smile. Yes, the Rodriguez family controls Taz port, and their power is deeply rooted in this island. With the commercial convenience of Taz port, they control at least 30% of the illegal business in the North Sea. After taking care of them, the remaining troublesome guys, the Snooker family, Vincent and Rockefeller, are no longer a big problem. Hearing the confident words of their young master, the four Torbol family cadres all laughed in admiration. Young master. Actually, we don't have to bow to that navy at all. At this time, Diamanti suddenly spoke in a sinister voice. He looked dissatisfied and indignant. When we capture the entire underground world of Beihai, with such power, the Beihai navy will not dare to do anything to us. Besides, he said nicely, saying that the underworld in Beihai belongs to you, but in the end, all the territory was won by ourselves. Did he, Rogers Darren, do anything to help us? As soon as this statement came out, everyone else suddenly fell into silence. The smile on Doflamingo's lips gradually disappeared. He turned to look at the four Torbol people. Do you all think so? The four of them lowered their heads, not daring to look directly into his cold gaze. We just think you're the natural king. A king must never bow to anyone. They whispered. Doflamingo looked at them without saying a word for a few seconds, turned around, and after a moment of silence, he calmly said. I don't think I've ever heard these words before. I don't want to hear it again in the future. Do you understand? The four people from Torbol bowed deeply and said respectfully. Yes. But while they were talking, they exchanged glances with each other. Doflamingo's tone was calm, but they know their young master too well. Often the calmer the tone, the more it illustrates the turbulent and deeply suppressed anger in his heart. Would the unruly and unruly-born king really bow to another person? The surname Don Quixote did not allow him to do this. Let's go. Doflamingo took a deep breath and once again raised his usual cold and sarcastic smile. To take everything that belongs to us. He raised his hands high, and countless invisible threads shot out from his hands, quickly disappearing into the void and shooting towards the distant town. The biting wind blew the pink feather coat into the air. Doflamingo laughed ferociously. The rules of this world are essentially that of the weak and the strong. Beihai. The moment the words fell. Boom. A member of the Don Quixote family pulled out a pistol and fired a shot into the sky. When the Don Quixote family is doing business, get out of the way of irrelevant people quickly. The surrounding civilians, merchants and sailors were startled by the sudden gunfire. They looked at the slowly rising skull and crossbones flag with pale faces, put down all their work in horror, and fled in a hurry. The members of the Don Quixote family also jumped off the ship with a grin on their face and rushed towards the stronghold of the Rodriguez family in the intelligence. The battle has begun. At the same time, a luxurious mansion, in a closed conference room, the fire was burning in the fireplace, reflecting two figures looking at each other from a distance across the conference table. The middle-aged man in a black picopelle suit looked at the naval colonel sitting opposite, smoking a cigar unscrupulously, with a solemn face, and said in a hoarse voice, "I know you're angry, Admiral Darren. But as the banker, don't you think it's a bit unfair to end it personally?" Darren narrowed his eyes and curled up into a sneer. "Yeah, it's unfair. But that's how things go." The middle-aged man had blue veins bulging on his forehead and gritted his teeth and said, "I have been following your rules for so many years, but now I just..." "But you still broke the rules." Darren interrupted him unceremoniously. The middle-aged man's face instantly turned pale. He looked at the navy in front of him with red eyes, and his fists with thick knuckles clenched and unclenched, and then clenched again. "Why me?" he gasped. "No, it's not just you, everyone who breaks the rules will be punished." The man was startled when he heard this, and then he laughed so wildly that he shed tears. "Ha ha ha ha. So that's it. That's fine too. We have been fighting each other for so many years, refusing to admit defeat. At least they all end up with the same end in the end, ha 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 ha. Rogers Darren, everyone calls you the scum of the Navy, but I know that you are actually a poisonous snake. Extremely cunning and extremely cold-blooded. I even doubt whether you have a trace of bondage and compassion in your heart. Let's do it. From the day I set foot on this road, I knew this day would come sooner or later. Others call me the giant of the black underground forces in Beihai." He laughed self-deprecatingly, his whole body shaking with laughter, and stared at Darren. "It's really ridiculous. In Beihai, the darkest thing is you wearing the banner of justice. Ask for everything, thank you very much."